Welcome to What's Up Wednesdays with Low Country DNA, presented by Ujima Genealogy of Coastal Georgia. My name is Michelle Nicole Johnson, and I will be the moderator for our talk tonight. This is our very first talk. If you haven't figured that out yet, we're still learning how to do this. If you have questions during our presentation, please leave them in the comments section, and I will do my best to monitor those and ask those of our presenter at the end of his talk. Ujima Genealogy is not a formal organization. We are a network of diverse people who are interested in African American genealogy in coastal Georgia. Our network began about 2 years ago with 3 people. Adolphus Armstrong, who is our speaker tonight, Terry Ward, who is a genealogist who lives in Florida, but who has roots on the coast, and me. We all have ties to Sapelo Island, Georgia. Adolphus and Terry are cousins biologically. I am their cousin by marriage. Our group eventually expanded to 5 members, and now we're up to about 10 members who are working to coordinate our programming and activities. And we are so grateful for the support of so many people on the coast, including Stacy Cole, who has helped us do this broadcast tonight, Hermina Glass-Hill and Amy Hedrick, who's been promoting our events, Emma Hamilton out of Atlanta with the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, and there are many more, and we're grateful that you are part of this coalition with us. We are working to create a space for family historians to come together and share and collaborate. We want to tell our stories. African Americans have a strong tradition of oral history, but we want to do more to help people document their family history with the vital records and articles and family obituaries and funeral obituaries and newspaper obituaries and wills and other sources that we often use in genealogy. Our speaker tonight is going to talk about another one of those sources, and that's DNA testing, a source that we can use in addition to those oral histories and the paper trail that's been left behind by our ancestors. Adolphus is a founding member of Ujima, and he is a Sapelo Island descendant who now lives in Atlanta. He is a member of the Atlanta chapter of the Afro-American Genealogical and Historical Society, and he's a DNA enthusiast and an expert at oral interviews, and he's many, many things, and he's going to be sharing more about himself as he does his presentation. So I'd like to welcome Adolphus. Good evening, Adolphus.
Good evening, Michelle. Thank you for that wonderful, warm introduction.
You're welcome. And Adolphus, while you're setting up your slide presentation, I wanted to ask you about how to talk people into doing a DNA test. I will admit that I was one of those people who was hesitant. I didn't think it was important. I didn't know how useful it would be to me. I thought I would be overwhelmed with information. But I did talk to someone who reached out to me, a stranger actually, who said she was related to people in my family tree on Ancestry, and she had done her DNA. And she said, well, have you done your DNA? And I said, no, I really don't know if I want to deal with all that information, and I don't know how it would be helpful to me. But she told me that you're going to be overwhelmed with information, but you can take your time and sort through it, and you will begin to see the patterns, where your ancestors moved or where they were taken during slavery, or where they migrated after slavery. And she said it'll give you a bigger picture of your family tree, and will definitely guide you in finding missing people in your family. So I was grateful for that advice, and I've since tested, and she was right. But I do wonder, how do you talk people into testing? Because I know you've tested a lot of people.
Well, it's definitely helped in that for everyone that I've approached to do a test, it's someone that I have a personal pre-existing relationship with, as opposed to someone who was reaching out to me over the internet, someone that I've never met, don't know, from the man in the moon. And so that makes it, a little bit easier, from that standpoint. And one thing that I will, share with folks is that once you are doing your DNA, I try and encourage people to get ahead of, what's happening, in that if you've ever gone to a doctor's office, had your blood drawn, your DNA is sitting in a database somewhere. You may not know exactly how it's being used, but for us, in terms of us doing our genealogy and trying to reconnect these families, I would prefer us to make an attempt to be proactive, getting ahead of that particular part of the curve to actually do this DNA testing, because our overarching goal is absolutely worthy, because we're looking to put these families back together with long lost branches. And in addition to that, we're just making an attempt to try and reclaim our family story. So that's what I utilize in terms of talking to people about DNA when they're a little bit, hesitant, because at this point, so many people have taken a DNA test. You may not be the one to take a DNA test, but if anyone in your circle, be it a brother, niece, nephew, grandparent, great niece or nephew, once they actually take a DNA test, your family story is already out there. So I'm just encouraging people to don't let the technology run by you, but actually be an active participant so you can actually help craft what that story looks like.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and if everyone can see my screen, if you see What's Up Wednesday, then that means the presentation is live and we are ready to go.
All righty.
Okay, well, again, welcome everyone to What's Up Wednesday. This is our first entree in terms of talking about DNA. And when you see with Low Country DNA, that's the moniker that we came up with when I met with Terry and Michelle 2 years ago. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start the Ujima Special Interest Group presentation. Our first one, December 2020. Again, it's Wednesday, so the question is, what's up for today? Okay, just to give you guys a little bit more background, I am a local to McIntosh County. I grew up in the Cannon Bluff community in Townsend, Georgia. And one of the things that really started me doing my DNA research and my family tree research is that I would, be with my mother's side of the family, my father's side of the family, and then it's a small community, so the same people would visit house to house. And it was just odd that my mother's people would call the person cousin, my father's people would call the person's cousin. So I was like, okay, this seems a little bit strange. Are we confused as to who our familial relationships are? But that absolutely was not the case, but that will become clear as we kind of go through the presentation. And for me, at this point, my ancestors have given me everything that I need to get by. And again, our wonderful moderator is going to be Michelle N. Johnson, who is the author of Sapelo Island's Hog Hammock. And then you'll notice as an inside joke, we have blah, blah, blah after her name. And that's just because if we wanted to go through all of Michelle's accolades, that would be the entire presentation. But that's not what we're here for today. So here we go into What's Up Wednesday. DNA. DNA is just a tool that will help you further your normal research. And for those of you who are just starting out, you want to go ahead and start out how anyone is going to start out with doing their research, and that you want to start with yourself and you want to write down everything that you know about your family. And once you have a chance to write down everything that you know, you want to go ahead and start to widen that circle, and meaning you want to interview the older members of your family or people who are more knowledgeable about the family. And again, that could be people inside the family and friends of the family who may not be biologically related, but because of relationships over time, they're very knowledgeable about the family. And one thing that I will note here, it's not so much important as to if the oldest person that you know can give you more information, because of the fact of how our families kind of meld and grow. You will probably come across that one younger cousin who happened to be raised by his grandparents and spent 20, 25 years in that house. And so you'll come across examples of when that younger cousin knows more about the family than the children of the actual grandparents, just because of the fact that he was there, grew up during the time. Because way back in the day, when you ask any questions about the family, you would get that grandparent or great aunt or uncle to look at you. It's like, okay, you better be quiet and stay in your place. But they're never so harsh with the grandchildren. And so you will definitely come across examples of where that one grandchild may know a lot more about the family than you would obviously give them credit for, just because of their age. So you want to try and cast a wide net as possible in terms of trying to pull the information together you're going to need for your family research. For those of us who actually have families that hold a family reunion, if you're starting down the road to documenting your family, the first thing that you want to do is identify who is your family historian, and you want to make that person your new best friend, because there's no need to recreate the wheel if they've already started the process of doing the interviews and documentation. If you are attempting to do the same thing, again, no need to recreate the wheel. Just get with your existing family historian and see exactly what can you do, potentially kind of help add to that story. And so at this point, if you are continuing on with your research, and again, in the instance you may find out there is no formal family historian and you may have to assume that role. So at that point, you want to go ahead and take everything that you know, and then you want to go ahead and start to actually create a paper trail for your family. And effectively, for most of us, what that does is you want to go ahead and start out trying to find your family in the census records. And at this point for us, that's probably going to be starting in the 1940 census and then going back, each census, trying to make sure that you can track your family in terms of your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. And for low country DNA, one of the things that you want to do is that you're not just going to be focused on looking at your immediate family. You're going to need to extend that search to look for the brothers, sisters of your grandparents, great-grandparents, because one thing that you will find, in order to tell your story completely, you're going to have to tell the story of these other branches that you are connected to. And the final piece that will definitely help you in your DNA/family history search is to try and figure out a strategy as to how best to use DNA testing to help further your research. Now, at this point, I am an accountant and I like to do things on a budget. So if you can save money, save the money. Right now, typically at the end of the year, when you're coming up to the Black Friday sales, all of the main DNA testing companies have these sales in terms of trying to get you in the door to do your testing with them. And the 4 ones that we're going to focus on today are Ancestry.com, 23andMe, MyHeritage, and Family Tree DNA. Unfortunately, we're a little bit slow in terms of getting our programming together because the absolute lowest prices typically of the year happen around Black Friday. And you'll notice on MyHeritage, their regular price is $79, but on Black Friday, they were selling them for $39. And if you bought 2 or more, it was free shipping. But, no need to fear. They are still holding sales, and that Ancestry has a sale that's at $59 through the end of the year. 23andMe, $79 through the end of the year. MyHeritage, not $39, but $49 is nothing to sneeze at. And then Family Tree DNA is currently on sale for $59. So just to give you guys a little bit more context as to what the differences are between the testing companies, is that there are 2 ways you can take the test. You can, get the dreaded tube that has that black line, and you actually have to submit a saliva sample where you have to get up to that black line. And the 2 companies that utilize the saliva sample testing method, that would be Ancestry and 23andMe. The other 2 companies that actually utilize the cheek swab test would be MyHeritage DNA and also Family Tree DNA. And again, it is exactly what it says, in that you get the kit, you get a cheek swab, and it's roughly a 6 or 7 inch cheek swab, and you take the Q-tip, you swab each side of the cheek, and you literally can take that test within 30 seconds. And trust me, I am not the most dexterous person with my hand. I don't have a lot of skill. Again, I'm an accountant. I use a calculator and Excel all day. It doesn't take much, skill to do that. But even I could, take that cheek swab test and administer it in 30 seconds. I'm out of the person's hair and you're up and running. The other thing to kind of note in terms of, as you're looking at the DNA testing companies, the numbers that you're looking at here are all from 2018, and they've grown since then, in that Ancestry has the largest database at having well over 10 million people that have tested. 23andMe, second largest with 5 million back in 2018. And then you move to the companies that are the cheek swab tests, with MyHeritage at 1.4 million, and then Family Tree DNA at 1 million plus. So the numbers have gotten larger at this point, but that's just something that you want to factor in when you actually do your testing, because depending on what you're trying to do, it will help drive which type of test that you want to take. And the reason why that I wanted to have this live is to try and help individuals develop a strategy. For me, At this point, my focus is trying to get some of the oldest family members to test. And here are the quick bullet points that I utilize in terms of trying to figure out, who I want to test. My focus is seniors who are 80 years or above. That's a critical group for me. And one of the researchers that we work with, Kevin Hughes, he calls that DNA the golden DNA. And so that's one of the things that I've been focusing in on, is trying to get our seniors tested. And another critical item, as you're working on your tree, if you identify someone who might be the last living member of a generation, that's obviously someone that you want to place a priority on in terms of making an attempt to getting them to test. Another item that you'll probably come across is that a lot of us have extended family who's moved to places like New York, Chicago, St. Louis, out to California, over into Texas. So if you've done your research and you've identified a family member who may have left around, say, 1920, and they still have living descendants who are alive today, those are people that you probably want to make sure that you try and get them tested. And the benefit of them testing is that they left the area around say, our grandparents' time frame. So they will be a nice solid reference point in terms of trying to figure out what the connections are. An example would be, like, I grew up in McIntosh County, graduated from McIntosh County Academy. So all of my people are in McIntosh County. So even when I'm trying to utilize my DNA because of the double, triple, even four-time, cousins, it becomes difficult to try and, distinguish the various lines just because of all the crisscrossing that we have. And the final thing that I would encourage you to do, if you do participate in a family reunion, even though the costs of the DNA tests have come down, if you could encourage any family reunion that you participate in to add DNA testing as a reunion line item budget. That way, the cost of actually taking the DNA test can be shared amongst the entire family, because at the end of the day, everyone is going to benefit as we start to put these families back together. And ultimately, that's what it's all about. That's literally what's up for Wednesday. How do we put these families back together? Okay. Because of the fact that we are on the coast, we have to talk about endogamy. And literally what endogamy is, if you had to boil it down to something you could quickly kind of fold up, put in your back pocket and utilize, is that's a situation where you have an isolated community, or a community that might be isolated or self-isolate themselves because of a religious purpose. And an example I would use would be potential certain Amish communities, Hasidic Jews. And it's literally when as you go up your family tree, you start to notice that cousins marrying cousins. And I am a living example of what endogamy looks like. Okay, so you guys are wondering, so what is this gentleman talking about? What does that look like? Okay, here we go. This is another What Up Wednesday. So this is my tree, and just to let you guys know, as we move through the presentation, in order to try and maintain a certain level of privacy for some of the information that I am presenting, you'll notice that I'll probably use initials, or in certain instances, I'll literally block out a part of the person's name, because a lot of these people don't necessarily want all their business out there on the internet, wink, wink, nod, nod, even though they're putting it on Facebook. But I digress. I don't want to participate in that. Okay, this is my family tree. And the endogamy, the most glaring example of my endogamy has to do with the Moran family. You notice that the name that's circled right now, P. Moran, she is my great-great-grandmother on my father's side of the family. And you notice that she goes into a G. Moran. That is her father. Again, this is on my father's side of the family, paternal. Now we're on to my mother's side of the family. She is a descendant of a B. Moran. And notice that B. Moran also descends from G. Moran. So looking at the two people that we've identified thus far, P. Moran and B. Moran, they were siblings, children of G. Moran and N. Powell. Okay, now you have an example of endogamy, but it doesn't end there, because hey, I guess my people just couldn't jump into the buggy and head to the next town, or maybe we had some money back then that didn't make its way to me, but we kept it in the family. And you notice the last circled individual, C. Moran, she's a generation above, but she is also a sibling to P. Moran, B. Moran, and her father is also G. Moran. So if I could extend this out one more generation, G. Moran would appear. So on 3 of my ancestors, my grandparents, C. Buckley, L. Moran, and R. Pierce, they all descend from G. Moran. So you can kind of imagine, you know, my joy in that each of these families was having a separate family reunion. So, you know, over the course of one given year, you know, you're starting to talk about a significant amount of money spending on these reunions. So at one point, luckily, back in the end of the 1990s, these families came together and started to have an overarching Moran family reunion. And that was wonderful, fantastic for me in that I could get together and see all my cousins. But I will share a quick aside with you. I think I created some issues at the family reunion because they started to recognize all the different branches of the family, and people started to look at me because it's like, okay, is this guy playing a whack-a-mole game? Because every time they would mention one of my branches here, I would stand up to represent. And so just a quick tidbit as to what endogamy looks like, especially if you start attending a family reunion where they pull all these people together, you will invariably come across someone like me who's going to be standing up multiple times at a reunion to, you know, recognize the various different lines of descent from one family. Okay, now what does endogamy mean for you when you're doing your DNA testing? It literally means that you're going to match people at a higher level than you normally would if there was no endogamy. You saw from the previous slide, my mother has examples of endogamy from her mother and her father. But because of the fact that my dad also comes from the same line, there's certain instances where my mother will match a person, I will match a person, and we've established that the tie comes from that same Moran ancestor. But when we look at the degree of how much shared DNA we have, sometimes I will be a higher match for the person than my mother. Not by much, but it will be higher in that you can clearly see that the reason why I'm matching higher is because of the endogamy, and that I've had 3 different opportunities to get more of that George Moran DNA coming down to me. The other thing you want to factor in and looking at, how do you look at your DNA matches and start to figure out, okay, where do I think the potential most recent common ancestor is going to be to start doing my research. And because of the endogamy, based on how the DNA got shared with you, chances are you might think that the common ancestor may be at the great grandparent level, when in fact, because of the endogamy, it may even be 2 generations further back. So it's just something you're going to have to factor in as you're doing your research. And for us, being on the coast, the same thing that was happening in Black people's family was definitely happening in white people's families. So endogamy that took place in our families was actually replicated in the planter class. And as the planter class started having children, with the enslaved, that further adds another layer of complexity that you're just definitely going to have to, work through. Another issue that you're going to run into, because of the fact that we're dealing with the institution of slavery, many of us will actually descend from actual breeders, in that you will have on certain situations where one female may have 22 children that were her natural biological children, and the same thing on the reverse side with a male who may have been a strong institution individual, and then that person was literally used to breed out amongst the various plantations. So that's just something to kind of factor in, that we're also going to have a lot of these half relationships that you're going to have to factor in on top of the potential endogamy. And the only way that you can come at this and attack it is that ultimately you're going to have to get yourself in a chromosome browser, and as you're going through looking at your matches, you absolutely have to keep an open mind about everything that you come across. Okay, the first company that we're going to quickly go through is Ancestry.com. And one of the things that I want to kind of frame this is that with the various testing companies, they primarily show you the exact same thing. They're going to give you an ethnicity estimate. They're going to show you who your DNA matches are. And they will, depending on the different company, they will give you a little wrinkle, something that you could potentially utilize, but we'll quickly go through. And again, what you're looking at, this is just the quick overview of what Ancestry looks like. In that, the first thing that you see, this is my Ancestry ethnicity estimate. And again, one of the things you want to focus in on for all of the testing companies, when they take your DNA, they're literally comparing your DNA to a reference panel population that they have developed. And because of the fact that you're doing DNA testing with different companies, each company has a different reference panel. And over the course of time, these companies will update their reference panel. So as they get more and more people to test in their database, and again, this is the reference database, these ethnicity estimates will change. I think Ancestry probably within the past couple of years has done a lot more in terms of looking at the African ancestry. And so my ethnicity estimate definitely has changed. And one of the things that I like about what Ancestry's done, if you notice at the bottom where it has these additional communities with the Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, African American communities, that is literally reflective of our history of being on the low country, in that the plantation owners over the course of time, as lands were depleted from South Carolina, they migrated into Georgia and also into Alabama. And so that's just one of the things that we will also see in our family. So that was just a nice feature. And typically knowing that in terms of migrating along the coast, there's a pocket, at least for my people that I'm matching with from their reference panel, that we all have ties to early North Carolina. So it's just another nice feature that Ancestry has placed out there. Oh, and the second thing that Ancestry will do, you notice that we just talked about the North Carolina community and the South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. They literally give you a graphical presentation of what that looks like. So in addition to everything that you see on the ethnicity estimate as to where those countries are, you will see how they have this, spread out on a map, and looking at, the various countries from Western Africa that I have genetic ties to. So that's just one of the things that's going to be consistent, across each of the companies that you look at. Okay, the next feature that Ancestry provides is a listing of your DNA matches. And again, you'll notice I have the little boxes trying to hide the privacy of folks. But on the first person, I love you, Mom. I forgot to hide part of your name. So if you are watching, please forgive me, and you can kind of, take one of my sweet potato pies away from me at Christmas. Okay, but looking at Ancestry, again, it gives you an estimate as to what they think the relationship is, and it'll literally give you an estimate of what the centimorgans are. So between me and my mother, we share 3,343 centimorgans, and centimorgans is simply a unit of measure to measure DNA. And I also have had the fortunate to have other relatives to test. So here's a paternal first cousin. The next person that you see up is a maternal great uncle, and then I have another first cousin coming through. So this is the type of stuff that you'll see in terms of your match list that will come through with Ancestry, and it's very similar across all testing companies. The other nice thing that these testing companies do, here's an example of a match, one of my lower DNA matches. For purposes of this discussion, we're going to just call her Lady. Lady and I are 4th to 6th cousins. We share, and that's the predicted relationship. We share 21 centimorgans of DNA across one segment. Now, one thing that I want to point out is that the first time that Lady and I matched, I noticed her back in August of 2017. At that point in time, we did not have any shared matches. And for those of you who are into the DNA, you probably are checking your counts each day or weekly. I'm one of those people who probably checks it at least multiple times a day just to see if I have any new matches. But you'll notice in August, we had no shared matches, but in December of 2017, we had an additional match, Hunter, which is this individual here. But for putting this presentation together, I did a fresh pull. And so between 2017, we've gotten a couple more people who have tested, and we are, have additional shared matches between our test kits. So that's just one thing, that once you do your DNA testing, it's not static, it's going to be dynamic. So as each sale comes through, more people will test. And so it will just give you more information, more data for you to, constantly go back through and look through. Okay, and here's another cool tool that Ancestry has put out, I think, in the past 12 months, in that when you're on Ancestry, you all build out your family trees. And what Ancestry does is that for all of your DNA matches, they will compare the trees for people who actually have trees out there, and they'll put them in a through line. And literally what that is that based on you being a DNA match and based on the tree that the person has placed out there, they make an attempt to try and craft a tree for you. So literally what this is saying is that for my ancestor M. Moran or Margaret Moran, who is on my paternal side of the family, I have 5 people who have tested with Ancestry that are DNA matches and also have Margaret in their tree. Moving over to the next Moran ancestor is that for William Bailey Moran, there are at least 2 DNA matches that I have out there that have actually tested with Ancestry. And moving over to my final Moran branch that I descend from, there are 4 individuals that have tested that actually have Charlotte Moran in their tree. The one thing that I want to caution folks on is that this through line project is only as solid as the trees that the people are putting up. So if there's an error in a tree, you probably will have someone who may appear on your through line that may be appearing, where they not necessarily should be. And when I say that, because of the endogamy, because chances are, if I'm related to you on the coast of Georgia, it may be through 2 or 3 different family lines. So that's why it's important, even though it's showing you that the person is a match and how it potentially comes through based on the trees, you always want to go and do some independent research just to make sure that the person's tree is correct, so you don't, bring any corrupting information into your research and into your trees. Okay, now the last resort in that we just talked about Ancestry.com, but the one thing that Ancestry.com does not do is that it does not provide a chromosome browser for you to compare your matches. If you have reached out to individuals and if they do not feel comfortable getting into a chromosome browser, the last resort that you can do is to see if you can convince them to share their DNA match list with you. And there is a feature in settings where you literally can go in and either put their Ancestry username or their email account, and you can share your match list with them. And as you can see here, I've been fortunate enough to meet with some very interested researchers. And so we've been able to share our kits amongst each other. And literally what that does is that they will have the ability to look at my shared matches. And at that point in time, if you've been doing this a while, you'll start to pick up on specific patterns amongst specific family groups. And they may be researching a family that I might not be aware of, but they may have noticed and detected patterns based on their research that I necessarily wouldn't be aware of. And so that's one of the benefits of allowing someone else to have access to your match list. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next company, 23andMe. And for those of you who are new to it, with your DNA, you have 23 chromosomes, with the 23rd chromosome being that sex chromosome, which is going to be your X and your Y DNA. X female, Y male. And one of the things to note is that for all the tests that we're discussing today, it's all based on your autosomal DNA. And you will probably have seen specific tests where people may test their mitochondrial DNA and their Y DNA. That is specific. Those are 2 specific tests that trace your paternal side from father to father to father, going all the way back. You may have seen people will say that I share the same haplogroup, I think, as Ramses III. Well, when people are literally referring to that, they're literally looking at that Y DNA trail that goes all the way back. And then you can also do the same thing on the maternal side of tracing that mitochondrial DNA. But the reason why I have not discussed these 2 types of testing here is that it's What's Up Wednesday, and we are looking at sales, and these tests are expensive. They're outside of my $99 limit. So at this point, I've only had 1 person to test using the Y DNA, but unfortunately, getting more people tested, it's just not in the budget. So we're going to now moving back into 23andMe and their some of the bells and whistles with their testing, in that you notice that it's relatively consistent across. Like, here I am here, and it gives a little breakdown of the various ethnicities that I match with, again, comparing me to what 23andMe has. And one of the things that you will notice is that back on Ancestry, they had the communities of Georgia, South Carolina, and Alabama, and then the early North Carolina families. But on 23andMe, one of the cool things that they have that did not show up in Ancestry.com is that they are pointing to a Caribbean tie leading back to the island of Haiti. And again, at this point, I'm going to take the presenter's prerogative, in that, growing up in McIntosh County, I kind of, over the course of time, I kind of realized that, everyone's related. So I was trying to figure out, okay, as I, left home, started dating, finally find someone, okay, this could be potential wifey. I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, this is perfect. I am going to, hopefully marry someone, once I pop the question, who's not going to be a cousin. I am going to break endogamy. And here you go. I take my 23andMe test kit, and it says Haiti, and lo and behold, I did marry a woman from Haiti. So we haven't seen where we're DNA cousins yet, but based on my look, I would not be surprised. So that was just one of the interesting things that 23andMe shows that did not show up coming through my Ancestry test. So again, most of the information is going to be very, very similar across the companies, but again, this is a point in time snapshot of comparing my DNA to 23andMe's reference panel. So as they update that reference panel, this will change, but you will get emails from them saying, hey, we've updated our ethnicity estimates, log back in and see how things look. And again, same difference in that this is showing you from a geographical standpoint for the ethnicities that they say that I matched, this is what it looks like. And then over here, you see that little smattering of what they're saying, that there's a connection to individuals who have ancestry in Haiti. So that's what Ancestry's ancestry composition looks like. The next thing that's unique to, and it's actually unique to 23andMe that you won't see in Ancestry, one of the things that they do is that they provide this Ancestry timeline. And literally what this is showing is that based on my ethnicity estimate, they're showing when that individual with that specific ethnicity entered into my Ancestry. So looking at the earliest ones, is African hunter-gatherer, French, German, Spanish, and Portuguese. So based on the census records, the oldest individuals that we've been able to trace have been a part of my Moran family. And based on what we know about them, this particular mix of African hunter-gatherer, French, German, Spanish, Portuguese, this relatively lines up. We haven't, at least in my research, I haven't gotten to the point where I could completely utilize this to leverage my research, but because of the fact that this is here, this is something you could definitely use to leverage, again, based on the ebbs and flows of what's happening with the when the slave trade stops. And because of the fact that we're on the coast of Georgia, we have the history of the wanderer, so this potentially might line up more closely if that's a factoid that's in your ancestry, if you are descended from someone who came off the wanderer. The other thing that Ancestry does not have is a chromosome browser. All of the other testing companies, 23andMe, MyHeritage, and Family Tree DNA, they all have a chromosome browser. And the view that we're looking at now is that 23andMe is taking all the ethnicities that they have identified in me, and they're literally laying those out by each of the chromosomes. So for an example, when you're looking at my 16.8% in European ancestry, this is where 23andMe is saying this is on each of my chromosomes. And so this could become a very, very powerful tool, but I'll show you another example of that on another testing company. But we wanted to make sure that we gave each of the testing companies a little light, did not want to just highlight the two largest ones, Ancestry and 23andMe. But again, this could be a tool that will really help take your research to the next level. Now, earlier we talked about endogamy, and one of the things that 23andMe does in that, if you recall back in Ancestry, they have the tool called through lines that makes an attempt to match you up with your DNA relatives based on the trees that they have put out. But what 23andMe came up with, again, this is a new tool that came out in the past year, in that they take your DNA matches and then they make an attempt to have you start to try and go back from a DNA standpoint in terms of trying to figure out who those ancestors are. Luckily for me, here I am, but I have 3 of my cousins who are also on the my paternal Armstrong side of the family. They've also tested with 23andMe, and so based on that, I've been able to start to put together my tree. But because of the endogamy, typically when someone has a tree, you start out with yourself and it goes out and out into infinity. But with my tree, and that's one of the things that people, as opposed to saying endogamy, they may say pedigree collapse. And really what that is your tree goes out and then it quickly comes back in. So an example would be for these two, for Lester and Verdi, and my Buckley ancestor here, they all descend from a George Moran. So my tree will go out and then it'll quickly collapse back into one family at the top. But as I was building this, because of the endogamy, 23andMe, it does not work so well with individuals who have a lot of endogamy in their families, because literally the program thinks I'm making a mistake as I make an attempt to get back to George Moran. So just something to kind of be aware of. And if you don't have a lot of endogamy in your tree, or if the endogamy took place maybe 6 or 7 generations back, this tool could be particularly helpful as you're making an attempt to utilize all the tools that 23andMe offers for your DNA testing. Okay, the next company that we have up is MyHeritage. And MyHeritage, again, they all pretty much do the exact same thing. They have their own reference panels that they compare your DNA to. So this is, these are my DNA kit from MyHeritage. And again, you see the rough ethnicity estimate, 29% Nigerian, 26% from Sierra Leone, and then 7 others that constitute 44%. So all of the companies do that. And so here's just a look of what MyHeritage ethnicities estimator looks like. And one thing that, as a quick aside, again, that presenter's prerogative, and that most of us will have heard a story in the family that says that, we had the Cherokee great-great-grandmother. But one of the things that you'll notice is that we've looked at my results for Ancestry. We've looked at my results at 23andMe. There was no Native American indigenous ancestry. But lo and behold, looking at the MyHeritage ethnicity estimator, you see that 1.5% of Native American ancestry. So who's to say there may be that Cherokee or Creek or Seminole ancestry in my DNA, but for the people who over the years who shared that story with us, I can pull up my MyHeritage ethnicity estimator and say, hey, there's something to it. So just a quick aside as to give you an idea of what the various differences are in the different testing companies, in that this small bit of Native American ancestry that is showing doesn't appear in MyHeritage. Well, it does appear in MyHeritage. It did not appear in 23andMe or in Ancestry. But one thing that I will share with you is that over the course of time, these companies have been changing their ethnicity estimators. The first time I got onto Ancestry, it did show a small amount of Native American as a potential ethnicity for me. But as they've updated their reference panel, that went away. So it's just something to keep in mind. And trust me, this snapshot has the Native American. I'm going to keep this just to show over the course of time how these things can and will change. MyHeritage. Now, MyHeritage does a couple of things slightly differently from the other testing companies, and I'll kind of quickly show you. Again, these are my DNA matches. Obviously, my mother is here again. Here is a paternal uncle, and here's a maternal great uncle, and it's literally giving you the estimate as to what MyHeritage thinks the relationship is. And similar to the other companies, it's going to give you the percentage of shared DNA. It's going to give you the number of shared segments, and for my mother, I'm sharing with her over 58 segments and so forth and so on, looking at, my uncle here, 20%, and it's reflecting it out either a half brother or an uncle. But the interesting thing that MyHeritage does is that here's an example of looking at my kid compared to one of my Campbell cousins, in that as it lists your DNA matches, it shows to the left, it shows what my shared DNA and what the relationship estimate is for me. But for my match, Miss Campbell, it literally shows the same thing from her standpoint. In order to look at this from, say, Ancestry.com, you would need that person to share their match list with you so you could see this. So this is a neat tool that MyHeritage provides, in that you can see what your relationship or estimated relationship with the person is, and also what the match that you're looking at, you can also see it from their perspective. So that is a very, very nice tool, just so you can kind of have everything at one quick fell swoop. The one thing that I will point out here is that you see this little symbol here. Whenever you see this in MyHeritage, that indicates that there is a little bit more information for you to dig your teeth into, which we're going to jump into now. In that, in MyHeritage, they also have DNA tools. And when we go back one side, when you're looking at this, this indicates that there is a triangulated segment with the individual. And literally what a triangulated segment is that in this instance, I'm still working with my Campbell cousin, an Armstrong relative and a Moran relative, in that it's saying that of all these people that I'm sharing with, there is one triangulated segment. And what a triangulated segment typically indicates is that for everyone that is along that triangulated segment, that all of you have a common ancestor. And this is literally what it looks like. The one triangulated segment that we share is on chromosome 20. So when I'm looking at those three individuals, my Campbell cousin, my Armstrong relative, and my Moran relative, is that we all share on chromosome 20 in this area. And based on what I know about their trees, that possible known ancestor is either going to be a Jackson, Moran, or Powell, but we just need to get more people to test to try and figure out for this particular part of on the 20th chromosome, which one of these ancestors actually provided that DNA. And again, because of the fact that I'm looking at those three individuals, we are all each connected on these three different lines. So now it's just going to be a matter of trying to figure out which one of these ancestors provided that DNA that would, create this triangulated segment for all three of us. The other thing, the next company that we're going to look at is Family Tree DNA. And again, this is a snapshot of a maternal great uncle that I have. And the reason why I wanted to show him real quick is that, again, all companies primarily have their ethnicity estimate. And one of the things that was fascinating to me is that typically I haven't done enough research to really leverage what these ethnicity estimates potentially could be leading to as clues. But one of the things that I noted here in that for my Pierce uncle, it is showing that for him in Western Europe, his ethnicity estimator is coming back 22% Ireland and nowhere else. So as I'm going back through and researching that part of the family, I will probably, have a heightened sense of awareness in the back of my mind if I come across any planter families that have strong Irish ties. Because of the fact that this clue is here, that's something that potentially is going to be a point for me in my research going forward. And again, same difference. This is just a geographical representation of what you just saw on his ethnicity estimator. And then there's that, 22% of Ireland, and then every other part that he has in terms of where it is from a geographical standpoint. One of the things that I wanted to also point out with Family Tree DNA is that it also does an X match on that sex chromosome, in that this is still my Pierce great uncle, and that these are all the individuals that not only match him from an autosomal DNA standpoint, and again, with this type of DNA sharing, all companies do that, but not everyone gives you an idea of who you match with on the X chromosome. And Family Tree DNA is a company that does do that. And so literally what that means is that on the maternal side of the family, all of these individuals ultimately will trace back until one common female ancestor. So for those of us in the African American community, this becomes very, very powerful, especially once you factor in the what we had to go through the institution of slavery and with the broken families that were either gifted away or even sold away. So that's something that we could potentially use as a reference point to try and put these families back together. Now, what you're looking at now is that a comparison of my great uncle Pierce. I was lucky enough to have two of his siblings also to test. And one of the things that I want to try and point out is that the focus, which should be on trying to get your older ancestors to test, because of the fact that for me, if I did not test, I would have tried to get both my parents to test, and I would have never tested myself because I can only get DNA from my parents. And so the one thing that I wanted to point out is that these are three siblings, and if you don't have the parents to test, if you're only dealing with their children, you want to get as much of or as many of the children to test as possible, because DNA is literally a random passage of information from at a genetic level to the next generation. So one child is not going to get the same portion of DNA as the other child. And a great example would be, this brother, looking at his DNA, Nigeria, less than 2%. His sister, on the other hand, 26%. And again, these are all looking, and these tests are all coming from family tree DNA. So it's comparing their DNA to the exact same reference panel. On the converse, looking at this brother's DNA from Ghana, Togo, and Benin, 48% of his DNA is coming from this one area, whereas his sister is only picking up 7%. So just a little example just to show you, how varied it could be between one sibling and the next. And before anyone asks the questions, yes, I put their DNA into multiple companies, and everyone shows that they are full brothers and sisters. So there's not a non-parental event that took place here, but just a quick way to kind of quickly show you all that if you're testing people, you want to try and cast a wide net as possible. So that pretty much, concludes my presentation on DNA, and that each of the companies have various strengths and weaknesses, and you're going to have to kind of evaluate where you might be able to focus your testing. And again, you saw examples of where if you're testing to try and get information on the ethnic background, that's available to you, and it also will help confirm various things that you know about your family tree, and it also will help you to find new branches and assist you in expanding your tree. So I would just want everyone to you take advantage of the sales that are out there. Test. And the beautiful thing about DNA is that once you test, that information is there until you decide to take it down. You don't have to look at it every day, every week. I've worked with people over the years. Once the bug hits you, you may test and jump into doing your research, and you may not touch it again for 6 months, or you may just pick it up around family reunion time. But the only way you can do that is that you actually have a test out there. So that's why it's so critical, especially if you're from McIntosh County. We've lost a lot of our seniors, during this year of COVID, where we, couldn't touch on them, hug them, and love them. But the beautiful thing is that you want to actually get them to test. And the one thing that I will share a quick story with you as I wrap up is that there was an example. For those of you who know me, I've worked with a number of researchers over the years, Terry Ward, Wilson Moran, Sammy Pinckney Sr., Sammy Pinckney Jr., had interviews with Cornelia Bailey, made contact with a cousin, again, Kevin Hughes, who's also a descendant from Sapelo. And one of the things that once we started testing, we tried to employ the strategy of testing your older family members. Well, Terry Ward had a great uncle that we wanted to test, but for whatever reason, his test would never come back with a complete result from Ancestry. And to give you all a little bit of context, when we started testing him, he was 96. So after the first test came back inconclusive, okay, 96 and a half. The next test comes back inconclusive, he's 98, 99, 100. And roughly after the fifth time, he refused to take another saliva test. And so it was going through that experience that I started to switch to the cheek swab test for any older family members. And that if you've ever taken a test, it takes a while to produce enough saliva to fill up to that tube, to that black line. So as opposed to putting my seniors through that, I just at this point opt for the cheek swab test. And gets great into the story. I happened to roll up to this, Terry's great uncle. How I rolled up to his house one day. I think he felt sorry for me because he has a dog called Buddy. Buddy almost tore my leg off, so I think he felt bad for me, and he actually took the test, and we were able to get an actual result from him using myheritage.com as the cheek swab test. So that is my kind of like success story in terms of doing the DNA. But again, thank you everyone for participating. And again, that's what's up for Wednesday. Michelle, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Adolphus. We do have a couple of questions. One viewer wanted to know, she's descended from Cannons from South Carolina, and she wanted to know if there's any connection between, if you know of any connection between Cannons and South Carolina and the community of Cannon, the Cannon Point community in McIntosh County. She wanted to know if there's any connection between those places, if you've done any research in that area.
Yeah, at this point, I'm not aware of it. One of our older family lines did marry into the Cannon family. So that's just one of the families as we're doing additional research that we're hoping to delve into. Because one thing that you will notice is that if a family has been in Georgia a long time, chances are, I'd probably give it 75% that there's probably some connection to some family in South Carolina as the family started to migrate down. But we have not proven an actual tie based on our research, but that definitely is something that we're keeping in the back of our mind as a strong possibility.
Okay. And someone sent me a question wanting to know, to do a DNA test through Ancestry, do you have to pay for an Ancestry account?
Oh, this is where you're going to really have to put your thinking cap on, in that once you take a DNA test, specifically with Ancestry, you can always get back to your results. But one of the things that you will know if you have not signed up for an Ancestry membership, before they allow you to log into your DNA results, it'll pop up, do you want, basically the prompts push you to think that you have to actually purchase a membership to get back to your DNA results, but you should be able to cancel, get past that screen and get to your DNA results. So you absolutely do not have to utilize or to sign up and incur that additional cost. Because one thing that I will tell people, if depending on how the budget is running, what you can do with Ancestry DNA in terms of doing the census research, you can also do at familysearch.org for free. So as you're making an attempt to build your trees, that's just one thing to kind of factor in, that Ancestry is not the end all be all. You can, from the comforts of your own home, you can use familysearch.org. And then once the libraries open back up, most libraries have a relationship where you could actually utilize Ancestry at your local library. So just something to keep in mind once COVID settles down.
Right. The public libraries have Ancestry Library Edition. And also, if you're a college student and your college has Galileo, you can access Ancestry Library Edition through Galileo as well. So those are good points. What happens to your DNA when you test with these companies, and how do you feel about law enforcement using the DNA that people submit for their genealogy purposes in order to catch serial killers and people who committed other crimes?
Yeah, now that definitely has become a hot button issue for folks. And at this point, it's almost as if the genie is almost out of the bottle at this point. But some of the companies have made an attempt to start to put protection in place. And I think when we're talking about the serial killer, I think it was the Golden Gate serial killer that law enforcement was able to track him through I think one of his relatives had uploaded their DNA to gedmatch.com. Well, since that time, GEDmatch has basically tweaked their settings in that you can opt in or opt out to have your DNA available for law enforcement to actually test against. So that's one of the features that you can do. And one of the things you also can do in terms of making an attempt to try and add some type of privacy is that you can create, say, separate email accounts, because I have a couple of kits that are on GEDmatch, but I don't use the person's name. I may use like cousin A 123, and I've seen a number of people do that. And I guess the other piece specifically talking about GEDmatch, because that was the tool that people used to identify that serial killer, is that you can opt in and opt out, in that you can make your results completely private when you are not actively researching. But when you're actively researching, there's a feature in the settings where you could make your results public so other people can find you. So that's one of the things that they've kind of tweaked that allows you to add a level of security. And like for the other testing companies, I think with Ancestry, MyHeritage, and 23andMe, I don't think there's an automatic in for law enforcement. I think in order to access their database, they have to obtain a search warrant. I think Family Tree DNA is the only company that allows law enforcement, access to their database, or they're more cooperative with the law enforcement officials as opposed to forcing them to go through the process of obtaining a search warrant in order to get to their data. So it's again, it's a double-edged sword in that because of the fact that so many people are testing, I can almost guarantee you, if you have not tested, someone in your family has. So the information is already out there, and it kind of goes hand in hand. You may not think that you're leaving a social media footprint, but trust me, someone has taken your picture, put it on Facebook, attach your name to it. So you may not realize how much information is out there. Now, kind of use an example is that there are certain people that might be on, say, a testing company. They may think their information is, not out there, but you could do a little bit of research, looking at common matches, maybe find a small hit on an obituary somewhere, and then you start using Google as your friend. You literally can put their families together, and even though they had none of their information out there, there's so many techniques. It's very hard at this point, based on where we are with technology and the oversharing of the younger generation, for you to say that you do not have a social media presence. If you ever Googled your name or tried some tips, you would be shocked as to what's out there on you already.
This is true. We have a comment from Amy Hedrick, who runs Glengen, the genealogy site, and she says that there were a lot of plantation owners in Glenn and McIntosh County who also own land in South Carolina. So that relates to the canon question that we got asked earlier. So that might be a topic we can explore together, maybe with Amy in the future. And yeah, and Adolphus, you definitely gave us a lot of topics that we might can explore on another Wednesday night in the new year. I don't have any more questions.
Okay, well, Amy, thanks a lot for that question. And for those of you who have not, Amy's Glengen, fantastic site, fantastic resource. Again, with Stacy and the work that she's done with Liberty County, there are a lot of people who are starting to, well, not starting to, but are starting to get more, I guess, some heightened visibility on their work. And so that's one of the things that we're hoping to do, is to highlight these resources so that people will know that they are there. So again, getting to Amy's comment, that work is work that needs to be done. It's going to be absolutely critical for explaining why your DNA is in South Carolina, Alabama, Kentucky, and places. Typically, you're literally following the planters, and as they either sold or bequeathed their property to sons and daughters. So that is that is something that we absolutely have to factor in going forward. Thank you, Amy, for the comment.
All righty. And by the way, we want to thank Stacy Cole for her help tonight in getting us up and running with our presentation. And her website is theyhadnames.net, which documents enslaved people in Liberty County, and she works with several organizations, the Coastal Georgia Genealogical Society, and we just can't thank her enough for her help tonight. Please like our page if you haven't already, and give us feedback on our presentation tonight, and let us know what other topics you'd like for us to cover. We look forward to seeing you in the new year, and we hope that you and your family stay safe, have happy holidays, and join us in the new year with more talk about family. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.